good morning, or depending on when you're listening to this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and I was always told I had a voice for radio, so I've made a podcast all about the Pokémon trading card game. And you're listening to PTCG Radio. And if you're listening to this shortly after it's recorded, it is a little bit late this week for that. I can only apologise. I have had messages from people already asking when the devil it's going to go up. Long story short, I had some friends around, and they're lovely people, and I enjoyed their company, but let's face it, they are not more important than PTCG Radio, so I kicked their bad selves out, and we are go with podcast. Now, what we're going to be talking about today is we've got some interesting little bits of news. We are then going to be talking about Theta Stop, the new ancient trait, which is coming in Ancient Origins, which has been causing a whole bunch of confusion. Now, it was looking like a bit of a slower week. I've got my, I suppose you call it a list of reserved topics, things that are not pressing, they don't have to be talked about now, but are topics I'd like to get into on future podcasts when we've got the time. For instance, based on a tweet I got from a lovely person whose name I cannot remember, I will get there one day. I will one day be doing a podcast all about, with this whole Theta double ancient trait, the one that allows you to have 2 Pokemon tools attached, which tools you should go for, what are the options. I'm also going to be doing, and this is probably going to go on for a few weeks, not just one podcast, but the new decks which are coming in from Expanded. When we go black and white on for Expanded in regionals and stuff, what decks that we forgot about a little while ago do we need to be thinking about? When I say go black and white on for Expanded, we've been there for a while, but it was never serious enough for the people to really be thinking about these old decks. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. The other thing we're going to talk about this week is, and it's only going to be a fairly brief one, but I'm going to be telling you, with pre-releases for Ancient Origins starting this weekend, I'm going to essentially give you a heads up in terms of the cards you want to be looking for at the pre-release, the cards you should think about trading for. But first, a couple overdue shout-outs. And I get quite a few emails and tweets and all from people on a fairly regular basis because of this podcast. I very much encourage all of them. Find me on Twitter @TheWassy, email me at ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk, or indeed, just, if you're listening on YouTube, as I know a whole bunch of you do, just leave a comment down there in the comment section where they belong. And I often get people telling me stuff which I am already aware of, giving me heads up of stuff which I've already heard about, but that doesn't mean they don't deserve a shout out for taking the time to send me the email, send me the message. So, huge thank you and shout out to Connor Kelly, who tweeted me last week asking me if I was aware of the whole Shiftry thing. Yes, I was, but he took the time to email me and say about Shiftry, and in doing so, did help me to realise quite such a big issue it was, and I needed to be addressing it on the podcast. So huge thank you to that chap. And to my very good friend Nicholas Pierce, who really went above and beyond and took the time and effort to send me a whole list of all the cards from all the sets which he thinks are relevant that are going to be rotated out when Standard goes XY on. Now, I did have my own list before he sent me them, but I'm currently doing on my YouTube channel, just go youtube.com/PTCG Radio. I'm currently doing a whole series of videos about what we lose in the rotation. I'm going set by set. I've already posted Boundaries Crossed and Plasma Storm. Plasma Freeze will be going up Thursday or Friday of this week. And he sent me a whole list of all the cards, and I do every time I finish my list, before I record those videos, I go back to Nick's list to make sure I haven't missed anything. Nothing yet, but you never know, there's still a few sets to go. So thank you very much to those chaps and to everyone who sends me emails and tweets, etc. They are very much appreciated. So starting off with some news this week. Now, there really isn't a huge amount of pressing news that we've got to get into and got to find out about, but there are a couple of little bits of news I want to talk about. Firstly, there is going to be a new Battle Arena deck, Mewtwo versus Darkrai. Now, this is going to be similar to the Xerneas versus Yveltal deck that came out a little while ago. Just get a couple of little decks in a set. No particularly new cards or anything exciting like that. And these are going to be headed up by Mewtwo EX and Darkrai EX. And they're going to be released on October the 21st. Now, first of all, this means that for Expanded, where Mewtwo and Darkrai are likely to be good playable cards, we are going to be, and I'll be talking about them more when I do my Legendary Treasures video on YouTube. That's when I'll be talking about Mewtwo and Darkrai. And I like to get into the history of these cards a little bit on those videos, so look out for that. I'll tell you why Mewtwo and Darkrai were such a big deal. Given that we're going to be doing Black and White on and Expanded, these videos, as much as they are what we're going to lose in Standard, I do talk about cards and if they're going to be useful in Expanded as well. But there is also another thing here. What are the set symbols going to be? Are these going to be reprints? And if they're a reprint with the Legendary Treasures, or the Dark Explorers, or Next Destinies, for Darkrai and Mewtwo respectively, symbols, in which case they will only be valid for Expanded, or are they going to have a whole new set symbol, a special set symbol for the Xerneas, for the Mewtwo Darkrai deck? If they have new set symbols, ladies and gentlemen, that means that they are going to be legal for Standard, which is ludicrous, given how long Mewtwo and Darkrai have been legal in this format. But if they get a new set symbol, ladies and gentlemen, they are back, and not just for another year, but probably a minimum of 2 years, which might be breaking a record for a non-trainer card being legal in the Pokemon trading card game. Other than, obviously things like Switch have always been legal and will always be legal. Second piece of news I want to talk about. I told you a rumour a few weeks ago, in fact several weeks ago now, I told you about a rumour that there was going to be a full art Steven coming in the new set. And trollandtoad.com, which is one of the leading American websites for buying cards online. Now, whether you like Troll and Toad or not, I don't really care. I'm not particularly interested in pushing any particular card shop until somebody sponsors me. And I must confess, about a year or so ago, I did start looking at sponsorship. I had some lukewarm to moderately positive responses from people, and they just never replied, got bored. I think if I got sponsored, I'd have to care about what I said and about offending particular card shops, and I don't want to upset anybody, but I don't want to not be able to report a story. I mean, I've dissed Troll and Toad in the past for their ridiculous pre-order prices, although I also defended through the laws of supply and demand why they have to be so. Essentially, if people are willing to pay, why wouldn't they charge that much? But anyway, the point of this is Troll and Toad are a respected website from which a lot of people make their pre-orders. And they have put a pre-order for a full art Steven, and they've even given it a set number. I want to say 96 out of 98, I could be wrong. Point is, now the artwork for this has not been revealed, nobody's seen the artwork, but it looks like we're getting a full art Steven. Now, Sam Taylor's going to be excited about this, as are his friends, like the lovely, wonderful, beautiful, brilliant person, Jake Wolvin. And if you're not listening to this, Jake, I hate you. And if you are listening, send us a Facebook message to show me you got that. I do love you, Jake, I really do. The point is, not a lot of people play Steven. But it's still cool to have another full art. And, Steven, it's a card that allows you to search for a supporter and a basic energy, and it could have more relevance as we go forward. Because the thing is, there's Trainer Lock's going to be a big thing, especially in Standard, with Vileplume, which it's a stage 2, but with Broken Vine Space, you can evolve right up to Vileplume on your first turn of the game. And Trevenant as a stage 1, but can take advantage of Wally to evolve on your first turn of the game. We have 2 situations now, Trevenant and Vileplume, where you can actually get Trainer Lock from the very first turn of the game. And you can do this going first before your opponent has even drawn a card. In situations like that, you can chain Steven in the way people used to chain Cyrus's... Was it Conspiracy? I'm going to look that up while I talk. But you can chain it, so essentially you would go for, one turn you'd go Steven and a basic energy, and then you would use that Steven the next turn to get another basic energy, and it was Cyrus's Conspiracy, I was right the first time. There was another supporter called Cyrus's Initiative, easy to get confused. So you can essentially guarantee that for as many Stevens as you've got in your deck, you've got that many turns of having basic energy. And in a deck like Groudon, and this is the deck in which Sam Taylor used this particular card, if you're under Trainer Lock, really, when it comes to Groudon, you just need 4 energy on your Primal Groudon and you win a lot of matchups. So all you need is just to go Steven for an energy and a Steven. Steven for an energy and a Steven, get 4 energy on your Groudon, come out, wreck face, win the game. So it's not huge news that we're getting a full art Steven, or that at least there is very strong rumour to suggest that we are, but I think it's fun enough to bring it out. And the last piece of news, and this isn't pleasant news, and I'm not going to go into great detail, and this came out like at the weekend, so I've had a few days to really think about this. But there was, and if you don't know, don't worry too much, I'll make this nice and quick. But at the weekend, there was a UK player who posted a very long blog post, or a friend of his posted it on his behalf using his word, really saying a lot of negative things about the UK base as a whole, the UK kind of organised play, but naming a whole bunch of individuals. I was very disappointed to learn, especially since I considered this person to be a friend of mine, that I was named through 4 different instances as someone who had wronged this particular person. Now, I have spoken to that person and expressed my disappointment at the fact that I genuinely believed that we were friends, and that this hurt me on a quite personal level. I don't want to sound like a wuss, ladies and gentlemen, but it hurts when people you consider to be friends say bad things about you. And we resolved it quite amicably. He did agree to take the things about me out before the whole blog post was taken down, for reasons completely unconnected to me. So I'm not going to give you a whole big rebuttal. What I am going to do is very quickly disprove all 4 of the things he said about me. And it goes like this. He said about the fact that I was unfairly rushing him to play. He got a warning for slow play from a judge. It was alleged that I was told off by a judge because of my appalling behaviour. I was not given a warning for my appalling behaviour. And although the judge that spoke to me on that day was a lovely, lovely person, she's also incredibly professional, and had I warranted, I would have been given a warning. So the warning and lack thereof disprove those 2. It was also alleged that in one podcast I slandered this particular person. Now, the podcast in question is podcast, I believe, 126. I don't need to disprove this one. Go and listen to it yourself. And you decide. I've had a whole bunch of listeners, in fact, including I think Charles Randall was the first one who did it. He even sent me the podcast with timestamps, so I didn't have to go and find the podcast myself, who have listened to it and backed me up, essentially. The 4th thing that was said was that I was standing next to him during a game, and that this was unfair, blah, blah, blah. Essentially here, I cannot disprove this, but you could ask the judges involved and they would back me up. Not only that, but the post has been taken down, but you can read later in the post, the same person talks about him and his friend standing watching people play during Top Cut, which is what I was doing. There we go, no harm, no foul, it's all gone now. But I thought it important to just respond very, very quickly, because some of you listening to the podcast may have read that blog post. I know an awful lot of people did read it before it got taken down, and given that some of you will have seen that post, I thought it was only fair that I disproved it. But like I say, hopefully, you know, you can listen to the podcast, you can look at the warnings that were and weren't given, and I can prove that it's all unfortunately untrue. But like I say, I've spoken to the chap, and you know, it's all been resolved amicably. No hard feelings, no harm, no foul, I suppose. So moving very swiftly on to something much, much nicer, but more complicated, if you can believe it, Theta Stop. Now, this is an ancient trait which is coming in the new set, Ancient Origins. And what Pokemon seem to be doing with all of these sets, from Primal Clash onwards, is that they introduce an ancient trait, but they only use it for one set. So in let's take Primal Clash as an example, you've got Alpha Growth, the ancient trait which allows you to attach 2 energy per turn. And it's given to a couple of Pokemon, like I believe Whiscash had it, and Kyogre had it, Kyogre EX, Primal Kyogre EX, but then it wasn't used after Primal Clash. I think similarly, I want to say Omega Barrage, the one that allowed you to attack twice. That came out in Primal Clash, and I believe it was given to Medicham, to Torchic, and to Excadrill, but has not been seen since. Well, one of the new ones from Ancient Origins, this set which is dropping in a few weeks' time and for which pre-releases are starting this very weekend, is going to be Theta Stop. And Theta Stop reads like this. Prevent all effects of your opponent's Pokemon's abilities done to this Pokemon. which seems fairly simple when you read it, and then when you start thinking about it, it gets an awful bit complicated. And seeing as people have been talking about this the last couple of days, especially today, I thought that I would take a couple of minutes to really explain Theta Stop to you lovely people, and explain how it works. And it all really comes down to the wording. What you need to look at here is the ability affecting the Pokemon with Theta Stop, or is it not? And I'll give you a whole bunch of examples in a minute. But the first thing I want to do is talk about the Pokemon that have Theta Stop. Now, I hope I haven't missed any here. I count 7, although really for our purposes, it's going to be 6. Now, in Ancient Origins, we have a Baltoy, which is garbage, a Porygon Z, which is moderately interesting but not good enough to warrant being a Stage 2, a Volcarona, and a Golurk, both of which are Stage 1s, but again, not terribly interesting, although the Golurk can be both Psychic and Fighting. And the most interesting and relevant one for our purposes is Mega Skeptile. And of course, you know, you've got your whole, you can evolve him on turn 1 with your Broken Vine Space, and he's got a brilliant attack, which for 2 energy does 100 damage, and allows you to attach 2 extra grass energy from your hand and completely heal any Pokemon to whom you attach a grass energy. This is a really, really quite strong attack. So he's one that most people have been talking about. Now, there are a couple of others. There is a Malamar, which is going to be released as a promo for us, I believe in some of the blister packs coming out soon, which is again not terribly exciting, although the Malamar has an interesting ability whereby all of the coins that your opponent flips while Malamar is active are to be counted as tails. Sorry, flips during their turn are to be counted as tails, which has a very interesting thing with Wobbuffet, which I'm going to try and explain in a minute, and that might be the one thing I get wrong, but I'm hoping it's not going to be. Now, there's also going to be a Celebi, which is very relevant because it's one of only 2 basic Pokemon that have Theta Stop, and as I'm going to talk about in a minute, that's very relevant when we talk about Shiftry. But the Celebi, no release has yet been announced. It's not coming in Ancient Origins. We are presumably going to get this Celebi at some point, but remember how long it took us to get Absol EX and Mega Absol EX? It took quite a while. So sometimes these Japanese promos that come around we don't get for a while. Celebi could be one of them. So in the set, Baltoy, Porygon Z, Volcarona, Golurk and Mega Skeptile. As a promo, one of the blisters, Malamar, and possibly coming at some point in the future, well, almost certainly, but we haven't got a blooming clue when, Celebi. For our purposes, I'm really going to be focusing on Mega Skeptile and a little bit of Malamar, because honestly, Baltoy's just a junk basic, and Porygon, Volcarona and Golurk are all, I mean, they're not horrific, but none of them look like cards that I can honestly see people making into competitive decks, so we ain't going to worry about them too much. Now that we've talked about the Pokemon that have Theta Stop, I think it's probably fairly important to talk about the relevant abilities. Now, there is a chap on Facebook, and I must confess, I don't know if he's a listener to the podcast. I must confess, I can't remember his name. I'm going to see if I can find out while I have a chat to you people, you lovely people. But essentially, he did a nice big list of all the Pokemon from XY on that have abilities that would be stopped with Theta Stop. If I'm completely honest, it was Joe Wennerman. Not a chap I'm familiar with, and not someone that I know listens to the podcast, but he gave a whole big list of all the abilities from X and Y onwards which will be stopped by Theta Stop. I'm not going to give you that list today, ladies and gentlemen. Incidentally, I made my own list, and Joe's list is pretty darn good. I'm only going to be talking about the abilities which I can see being used. And then hopefully we're going to use that to talk about and help you to understand how Theta Stop works. So, we've got Ludicolo / Pyroar and an expanded Genesect. All of these Pokemon have abilities that basically work like Lysandra or Pokemon Catcher. Genesect allows you to bring a bench Pokemon active when you attach a Plasma Energy. Pyroar allows you to bring a bench Pokemon active when you discard a Fire Energy attached to Pyroar. And Ludicolo allows you to bring a Pokemon active on a coin flip. None of these could be used to bring... I'm going to be talking about Mega Sceptile. He's going to be my example. None of these could be used to bring Mega Sceptile active, because the ability is targeting Mega Sceptile. I'm going to say Malamar. Sceptile's going to annoy me if I say it too much. None of these abilities could be used to bring Malamar active, because the ability is... it's affecting Malamar. It's bringing Malamar active. Now, let's assume Malamar's in the active, and you've got a Mamoswine on the bench. And I know there's no legal Mamoswine anymore. I've ranted about that in my Plasma Storm video. youtube.com/PTCG Now, if there's a Malamar in the active and somebody wants to use Red Signal or Pyroar or Ludicolo to bring the Mamoswine active, that does work. Because the effect of the ability is not on Malamar, the effect of the ability is on Mamoswine. Mamoswine gets brought active, and the fact that Malamar goes to the bench is essentially an unavoidable consequence. The ability does not target Malamar. The effect of the ability is not on Malamar. The effect of the ability is on Mamoswine. So Malamar cannot be brought active with any of these abilities because it's got Theta Stop. However, Mamoswine or any other bench Pokemon can be brought active in place of Malamar because the ability is not affecting Malamar. I hope that made sense. Let's go through a few others. Dragalge has an interesting ability, and this has seen a little bit of play recently, that stops a Pokemon retreating if they're affected by poison. But of course, that is stopping the Pokemon retreating, i.e. the effect is on Malamar. Which means that if Malamar is poisoned, and he tries to retreat, then Dragalge says, ahaha, you cannot retreat, Malamar. My ability stops you retreating, and that means it's affecting Malamar. So Malamar goes, sorry mate, I've got Theta Stop, I get to retreat. Crawdaunt's ability, which discards an energy attached to the active Pokemon if you evolve into Crawdaunt, would not affect Sceptile or Malamar, and this one's much, much easier because you're trying to discard energy from the active Pokemon. It doesn't work. Absol has got an ability which allows you to move 3 damage counters from one of your opponent's Pokemon to another. You could not move damage onto a Theta Stop Pokemon like Malamar or Sceptile using Absol. That doesn't mean you couldn't use Absol's ability. It would mean that you would be able to move the damage to anyone but those 2 Pokemon. Ariados, he's one of the new ones that's coming in Ancient Origins, and his ability poisons both the active and, well, both the actives. And you wouldn't be able to poison Malamar, and that's similar to Crawdaunt. It should be an easier one to understand. You are trying to poison the active Malamar, it doesn't work. Now, another one along those lines. I don't know if anyone's going to use Victory Bell. I did talk about him last week when talking about my Pokemon. I think it was last week when I went through Broken Vine Space in a whole bunch of detail and talked about all the grass Pokemon you could use with it. I talked about Victory Bell. And Victory Bell, you discard a grass energy attached to him, you get poison and confusion on the active Pokemon. Again, that would not work. Now, I'm going to attempt to go for Wobbuffet here. If I do, and I don't think I'm making a mistake, just so we're clear, but if I do make a mistake, hit me up on Twitter @TheWassy or email me at ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk to correct me. But I think I've got this right. Now, Wobbuffet has an ability which turns off abilities of all non-psychic Pokemon, which means it is turning off the Pokemon's ability, i.e., it's ripe to be stopped with Theta Stop. However, of the Pokemon that have Theta Stop, and as I've said, I cannot guarantee this, but I think it's incredibly likely we will never see any more Theta Stop Pokemon. They tend to be one set only. We've got our 7, essentially. One of them's a Golurk. He's got the ability which makes him both Psychic and Fighting type, but Golurk is Psychic. And Wobbuffet turns off all abilities other than Psychic Pokemon, which means there's no point looking whether Golurk keeps his ability, because, well, Wobbuffet wouldn't turn it off even if Wobbuffet's ability works. But Malamar's got an ability, so let's look at Malamar. So, we have Wobbuffet, who has an ability which would turn off Malamar's ability. Malamar's ability being, every time you flip a coin on your turns, it comes up tails. Wobbuffet would then go, well, unfortunately, Malamar, you ain't Psychic. And because you're not Psychic, that means that your ability is turned off by my ability. And that would usually be true, as long as the Wobbuffet's active. However, Malamar has Theta Stop. So essentially, Malamar's got his ability, Wobbuffet turns off Malamar's ability, but Malamar's Theta Stop goes, hang on a second, you are turning off my ability. That is an effect of your ability done to me, therefore it stops. So Malamar's Theta Stop turns off, essentially, Wobbuffet's ability, meaning that Malamar's ability turns back on. Now, if that's all a bit confusing, remember it like this. If there's a Malamar active against a Wobbuffet, Malamar's ability does work. Whew, there we go. Now, to help with this, let's talk about some Pokemon whose abilities would not be stopped by Theta Stop. First of all, anything like your Safeguard Pokemon, your Suicune, your Sigilif and Expanded, and Pyroar. Now, I've already mentioned Pyroar. I talked about the Pyroar that's got the Lysandra-like ability, which brings a Pokemon active. Now I'm talking about the Flash Fire Pyroar, whose ability means it cannot be hit by basic Pokemon. Now, it's kind of irrelevant, because the only basic Pokemon with Theta Stop are Celebi, who hasn't been released yet, and Baltoy, who's a garbage basic. Neither of them are going to be attacking Pyroar. But just on the off chance, they would not be allowed to. And the reason is very simple. Safeguard and... let's stick to Pyroar for the second. Pyroar's ability does not affect Baltoy, nor does it affect Celebi. So it's not affected by Theta Stop. Pyroar's ability affects Pyroar. It is an effect on the defending Pokemon. Therefore, Theta Stop does not come into play, and Baltoy and Celebi cannot hit Pyroar. In Expanded, if you've got a Mega Sceptile EX against a Safeguard Pokemon, think Suicune, think Sigilif, Mega Sceptile would not be allowed to hit them, because the Safeguard ability stops EXs hitting them, and the Safeguard ability is an effect on Suicune and Sigilif, not an effect on Sceptile. So Sceptile would be bound by the Safeguard and would not be able to hit those Pokemon. It's the same reason why Cobalion EX's second attack does. Now, for those that don't remember, Cobalion EX's second attack is Steel Bullet. For 3 metal energy, it does 100 damage and is not affected by weakness, resistance, or any other effects on the defending Pokemon. The reason why Cobalion EX can hit Safeguard Pokemon, Safeguard is an effect on the Safeguard Pokemon, is the same reason that Mega Sceptile cannot, because Mega Sceptile, a Safeguard is affecting the defending Pokemon, the Safeguard Pokemon, which means Theta Stop is not interested. Theta Stop only stops abilities which affects Sceptile, not the defending Pokemon. I am sorry if this is confusing. It sounds like it's confusing, but I am explaining it as well as I can. Hopefully, if you listen to it a few more times, it will get it. But feel free to send me a tweet or an email if you want any extra help. The last two I'm going to mention nice and quickly is Hawlucha. Weakness and resistance do not count against the Theta Stop Pokemon, because Hawlucha, it's affecting his attack, ergo, it's affecting Hawlucha. Theta Stop is irrelevant. Now, there's two other things which I think need to be mentioned here before we stop. Firstly, we've got your Forretress. And Forretress, he's the one you evolve and you put 1 damage counter on all of your opponent's Pokemon. Now, you've got a weird issue here. Let's say your opponent has got 4 Mamoswine on the bench and a Malamar. Forretress comes in, he would put 10 damage on all 5 Pokemon, except Malabar's got Theta Stop. It's very simple. You just think of it as it's affecting each Pokemon individually. So all 4 of the Mamoswine are affected by the ability and take the 10 damage. The Malamar is not affected by the ability because Theta Stop. Therefore, Malamar doesn't take 10 damage. So if an ability would affect multiple Pokemon, some of which have Theta Stop, it doesn't affect the ones with Theta Stop, it does affect the rest. Nice and simple. The very last one is one of the more confusing ones, and even though it's being rotated out for Expanded, I think it's worth having a very quick mention, and this is Mew. Mew's ability, which allows it to copy attacks of any Pokemon on the field, that affects Mew. So it does go through Theta Stop. What that means is Mew could copy Mega Sceptile's attack using its ability, and that's fine. Because even though it's copying the attack of the Mega Sceptile, the ability, and that's what Theta Stop would be turning off, the ability is affecting Mew. The ability gives Mew the option to copy attacks, and at that point the ability is effectively stopped. It's not, but it's a good way to think about it. The ability has affected Mew, now it stops. Mew can copy Mega Sceptile's attack because the ability isn't affecting Mega Sceptile. It's allowing Mew to copy Mega Sceptile. I hope that makes sense, ladies and gentlemen. This Theta Stop business, it's been going around for a day or two now. People have been getting confused, and it's one of those things I had to sit down and have a good think about it and sort them into. When I started thinking about doing it on the podcast, I had to spend a few minutes really collecting my thoughts together and checking with a very good judge friend of mine to make sure I had it correct. And then I thought, well, hang on a second. If I've gone to that much detail to make sure I've got my head around it, probably best to share with my lovely podcast friends. So yeah, I hope that made sense. Hit me up on Twitter and email if it didn't. Or if you're listening on YouTube, just chuck a comment down below. Now, before we get to the pre-releases today, it was something I was going to do today, and I'm not going to have time. I'm going to be honest with you, but it's hopefully something I'm going to start next week. And it's not something I'm desperate to get knocked out in one podcast. I'm happy to take a couple if it takes a couple, or even just do a little bit per podcast for a month or two if it needs to be. But I want to know about decks. I want to talk about decks that are, and I'm focusing on decks here, not individual cards, which are making a comeback in Expanded. Decks that we haven't seen for a while that used to be good, that in Expanded could be good again. And I'm asking for your help here. So I'm going to give you 5 decks that I knocked up on my shortlist very, very quickly. And I want you to email me at ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk or tweet me at TheWossy, TheWossy, or leave a comment on YouTube or SoundCloud or WordPress. However you're listening to it, there are many options. If you think there are any decks that are going to be making a comeback in Expanded, i.e. they were good once and might be again, that aren't on this little shortlist. So here's the ones I've got. Kling Klang, both Black and White and Plasma Storm. Durant, Excelgor Vileplume, Blastoise, and Flygon Dusknoir. I think all 5 of them could be viable decks in Expanded, and they're all decks which are dead in Standard, and they have been dead for a little while. You know, the most recent one of them to die was Blastoise, and that ain't been good for a year. So, if there's any other decks that you think could make a comeback in Expanded, let me know, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm going to finish off today talking about Ancient Origins just a little bit. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these cards in a huge amount of detail, but I know the pre-releases are starting this weekend and a whole bunch of you are going, and I haven't done my big review of the set. Don't worry, that's happening. I'm going to do my top 10 cards of Ancient Origins on YouTube, as I always do for every set nowadays, but I'm going to give you my comprehensive review. Now, what I would say is, I did my comprehensive review when it was called Bandit Ring in Japan, So if you want a review early, my initial impressions will be given in the podcast called Bandit Ring. I forget the number, but it's on my YouTube channel. Or if you go on ptcgradio.wordpress.com, you can find a full archive of all of my podcasts going right back to number 1. And actually, I get that question once every couple of weeks. How do you get a full archive? ptcgradio.wordpress.com. Or if you Google PTCG Radio, it'll be one of the first things that comes up. But go and look at my Bandit Ring podcast. They were initial impressions. My first impressions when I saw the card, not after a whole lot of thought. But if you're desperate for my ideas, go there. I am going to be doing my With Hindsight review in a week or two when the final set list has been confirmed. Maybe even as early as next week, I'll be doing my full review of Ancient Origins. But just for the pre-release, here are the cards that you need to go and grab. And I think I'm pretty much going through in set order. Vileplume. It turns off trainers. It can take advantage of broken vine space. It's going to be a viable deck in Expanded and in Standard. You could all do with having a playset of Vileplume around. I'm also going to try and tell you, by the way, how many of these you're likely to need. Ariados. He's the one I mentioned earlier with the ability that can poison both the active and the benched. All grass decks are going to want Ariados. I cannot imagine more than a 2-2 list in most decks, so if you've got 2 of these bad boys, you're probably going to be okay. Sceptile and Mega Sceptile. It's worth getting these. The Megas, you rarely need 4 of the Mega, but if you're really serious about a deck of these, you need a 4 Sceptile, 3 Mega Sceptile. What I would say is, people I've heard that have been testing this have been finding that the 2-hit KOs are damaging and the extra healing done by his attack is not quite as good as it could be, and you don't use it all that much. So it's touch or go whether this is going to be an amazing deck or an also-ran. You have been warned. Vespiquen. I'm talking about the Revenge one. I mean, the Ancient Trait one's pretty good. Maybe get 1 or 2 of them. But the Revenge one that does 20 plus 10 for every Pokemon in your discard pile, I think it could be really good now. It's one of those cards that could always be good, and it could get better as we go along. Like Flareon that took a while to find his feet. I would get 4 Vespiquen and stash them. By the way, even if you're not going to pre-releases, think of this as a buying list if you're going to go and buy singles off a website in the near future. Because essentially, this is my buying list when I go on the website. There's a UK site I use. I'm not going to name them. I ain't giving them any free publicity. But I'm going to go and buy all the singles I want when it's released. So, yeah, this is essentially my buy list. Evolutions, I'm talking Flareon, Jolteon, Vaporeon. They're the stage 1s that turn all of your Stage 1 Pokemon to also be Fire, Water, Electric, respectively. I'm going to get 2 of each. Because in any Stage 1 deck, any deck with a Stage 1 attacker, these are going to be amazing techs to cover different types and cover other matchups. But if you're really worried about grass decks, you want 2 Flareon in case 1 is prized. If you're really worried about electric decks, you want 2 Jolteon in case 1 is prized. You'll probably rarely play more than 1 Flareon, Jolteon, or Vaporeon in a deck, but if you ever want to play more than 1 in a where it's really important because 1 might be prized, I'd get 2 of each. Ampharos and the Mega, I say the same as I said about Sceptile and Mega Sceptile. Could be amazing, could be overhyped. You want a 4-free line, it's going to be hard to get at a pre-release. I leave that one up to you. Unknown. I think he's an uncommon. You discard him and draw a card. It's going to be brilliant in speed decks, brilliant in Vespiquen. Even if you have no deck list that you want to run at the moment with Unknown in, get 4 Unknown. It's the kind of card which you'll use at some point and could well go up in price. Hooper EX, it's got a brilliant ability. Maybe some decks will play as attacks garbage. The ability allows you to search for free EXs. Rayquaza is going to be good next format. Hooper is going to be good for Rayquaza. Having 2 or 3 of these, I don't think 4, but having 2 or 3 of these could be good. But it's coming in a tin. So don't go overboard trying to get Hooper, because it's going to be out in a tin before you know it. Machamp EX, I don't like Machamp EX. I think the 2 energy requirement and the fact that he needs to be poisoned, blah, 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 is going to be too much. Some people think Machamp Ariados is going to be good. If you're one of those people, go and get 4 Machamp, because Machamp's going to be your attacker. You need 4 of them, really. I'm not sold on Machamp. I get away with 3, to be honest. I think the price is likely to fall because people aren't going to be playing it. And the general rule with VXs is either it's used in decks a lot and the price skyrockets, or it's not and the price falls. I would bet the Machamp's going to fall more than it's going to rise. I could be wrong. Could be brilliant. 1EX, which I think you should probably make more of an effort, and he's in terms of Pokemon I really think is going to be good, he's my favourite, and he's ironically weak to Machamp. It's Tyranitar, the Mega Tyranitar. More specifically, again, a 4-3 line. If you want to run the deck, you run it with bats. I think Mega Tyranitar could be garbage, but I also think it could be really good. Forretress would also be pretty good with him as well. So, I'm sorry, I'm going off on a slight tangent here. Probably should have mentioned Crobat and Golbat when I was talking about abilities which affect Pokemon that you need to know about. Yeah, they very much target. They can't hit the Theta stop Pokemon. So yeah, bats can't hit them. Should have said that, didn't. Sorry about that. Speaking of bats, Tyranitar. He's good. I would heartily recommend going and getting a few of these bad boys if you get the opportunity. I'm not going to say he's going to be amazing. The non-ancient trait Metagross. I don't like the ancient trait one very much, but the non-ancient trait, he's got a good attack, he's got a decent ability. I don't think you need to run and get a playset right away, but I expect him to be like, $2 or $3, shall we say, on most websites. I'm going to get a playset of him just in case. Because I've never played a deck with Bronzong, but I did go and get myself a playset of Bronzong when it was released, purely because it's the kind of Pokemon I can imagine doing. And for all you people that are deck building on a budget out there, as a lot of us are, one of the biggest bits of advice I could give you, and it is a small outlay, but not too much. Cards like a lot of the ones I'm talking about here, especially the non-EXs, a lot of these websites put them up for a couple of quid, couple of dollars when they're first released. And it's worth getting a playset. I've never played Pyro in a tournament, but the second Flashfire came out, I went and got a playset of Pyro. I paid £1 each. They then went up in price massively. And you can even flip them if you really want, sell them on for more money later. But I've got them there if I ever want to play it. And the same thing with things like, I have a full line of bats. Now, I have played them in a tournament, but it's worth getting them. And especially when they're first released, before they start doing well in tournaments, getting things like a playset of your Vespiquen, your Metagross, etc., they can make good budget decks, and if you've got them lying around, they really can help. Giratina EX, I think, is overhyped, but could end up being pretty good. Worth getting 3 or 4 of them if you want to. Lugia EX, I've put a question mark next to Lugia. I don't like him. Some people do. So, I don't think he's going to be good. But again, I don't think he's going to be good now. I can absolutely foresee a situation in which Lugia gets much, much better in the future. I don't think he's going to have the impact Mewtwo did. Level Ball, you need 4 of them. Now, it's an exact reprint of the ones from Next Destiny, so if you've got ones from Next Destinies, pretty much anyone who played back then will have, don't bother your pretty little heads about it. But if you don't, go and get a playset. Lucky Helmet, I don't really think it's going to see a lot of play. You get to draw 2 cards when your opponent damages you. I don't really think it's going to see a huge amount of play, but I'm going to get a playset just in case. Ace Trainer, it's going to be a supporter. You can play it only when you're behind. Both players shuffle your hands, you get 6, they get 3. Slow decks are going to want this. Go and buy a playset. You may never use a playset. It seems like a 2 of in most decks, but still. Especially with VS Seeker in the format. Hexmaniac, I don't think you need... Well, I don't know, to be honest. But I don't think it's going to be expensive. It's a supporter that gives you the block's abilities for a turn. If Trevenant, Vileplume, these kind of Train Lock decks become big, so will Hexmaniac, because it will turn off that Train Lock for a turn. So again, get yourself a playset of these. Color Drain Stadiums, put 2 damage counters on Mega EXs between turns. That will add up quickly. If you're a deck that doesn't need a particular stadium, grass decks are going to play Broken Vine Space. and fighting decks are gonna play Fighting Stadium. For all the decks that don't need their own stadium, Color Drain Stadium can really do the trick. And Giant Plant Forest, best card in the set. I mean, spoiler alert, I don't know if it's going to be... I was just about to say it's going to be number one on my top 10 cards, but I don't know. Hooper's an absolute beast in terms of what it can do. And Vespiquen's amazing. Level Ball's brilliant. Ace Trainer's really good. Yeah, maybe you'll have to wait for my final list. Maybe I need to make my final list. But they're the ones. Just, if you haven't been writing them down and you want to grab a pen and paper, here's the list without my commentary as we go through. Vileplume, full set. Ariados, 2. Sceptile, Mega Sceptile, 4-3. Vespiquen, 4. The Evolutions, Flareon, Jolteon, and Vaporeon, 2 of each. Ampharos, if you want it, 4-3. Unknown, you want a playset of 4. Hooper, unless you're desperate, wait for it to come out in a tin. Machamp, 3 or 4 if you want to play it. Tyranitar and Mega Tyranitar, 4 and 3 if you want to play it. Metagross, grab a playset. Giratina, 3 or 4 if you want to play it. Lugia, 3 or 4, but I think it's overrated. Level Ball, get a playset. Lucky Helmet, get a playset. Ace Trainer, get a playset. Hexmaniac, might as well get a playset. Color Drain Stadium, get a playset. Giant Plant Forest, get a playset. Don't try and get 20 or 30 and then sell them on for a profit later. It's Pokemon. What I do heartily recommend is getting more than one playset and then giving them out to new players at your league so they can build grass decks on the cheap. And actually, if you are a league leader or you are somebody who's got, friends that take it up, etc., or children that you know who play, it's really worth getting extras of the cheaper Pokemon, things like your Metagross, your Vespiquen, etc., and these trainers when they come out. I am a big fan of keeping things like Juniper and N and Ultra Ball around, so that if I find newer players who go, I don't have any Ultra Balls, I can give them, even if I don't have a playset on me, I can chuck them 1 or 2 as extras. If we want to encourage new people into the game, I think this is a really good thing to do, and certainly a friend of mine, Jeffrey Toolman, he said a friend of his is getting into the game, and I'm not going to be able to do it for a week or 2 till I get back, but when I get back to my usual abode, when I leave Cornwall, which will make me sad, but I have to do it eventually, I'm going to go and grab a playset of Ultra Ball and see if I got any more Sycamores, etc., to encourage his friend to get into the game, and I heartily recommend you to do so. Although, to be honest, I know a lot of you already do. Anyway, let's quit the waffling, ladies and gentlemen. Today, I have given you a couple of bits of news. I've defended my good name. I have at least tried to explain Theta Stop in all of its glory, and I have given you a list of Pokemon that you should be or cards that you should be looking out for at your Ancient Origins pre-release this weekend. I think I've done enough for 1 week. I'm going to be talking about Theta Double and the tools that you should use with those Pokemon. And I'm going to be talking about decks making a comeback in Expanded in the coming weeks. And I would very much like tweets, emails, comments about either of those topics if you got anything you would like to tell me. Next week, we may well be coming with a review of Ancient Origins, and make sure you please keep checking out my YouTube channel, youtube.com/PTCG Radio. I am in the process at the moment of explaining in a lot of detail the entire rotation set by set, and I think when I finish, I'm going to start with Black and White, and I'm going to give you all the expanded sets and all the cards you need to know. I am essentially going to be giving you, set by set, everything you need to know for the rotation, and I'm going to aim to be done by the time that we hit the rotation in September. I think you should check it out. And my usual plea, go check out Wassy Plays. It's one of the featured channels on PTCG Radio, or just search for Wassy Plays on YouTube. Quite frankly, ladies and gentlemen, it's just like PTCG Radio, but it's about video games, and I have a sneaking suspicion if you try it, you'll like it. Thank you very much for listening. Look after yourselves till next week. My name's Ross, and you've been listening to PTCG Radio.